The night Sarah Voss arrived at the Conti estate, the rain came down like a punishment from God. She sat in the back of the black Mercedes, her single suitcase pressed between her knees, her hands folded in her lap, with the kind of practiced stillness she had learned over 22 years of being the quiet one, the good one, the daughter who never asked for too much. The leather seat was cold despite the heat running through the vents. Outside the tinted windows, New York City dissolved into the expressway. Then the expressway dissolved into a long private road, flanked by iron-black trees, and then there was nothing but darkness and rain, and the slow, terrible understanding that she was not going home again. Her mother had cried. That was the detail Sarah kept returning to, pressing her thumb against it like a bruise. Her mother, Diane Voss, who had not cried at her own father's funeral, who had once set a broken wrist herself rather than pay for the emergency room, had wept with what looked like genuine grief when she had explained what had been arranged. The debt was $460,000. It had started, as these things always did, with something small, a business loan to keep her late father's restaurant alive, then a second loan when the pipes burst, then a third when the pandemic took the last of the customers. By the time Sarah's father died of a stroke 2 years ago, the debt had been sold 3 times over, and each sale had carried it higher, until it landed in the hands of people who did not use courts to collect. "He's an old man," her mother had said, as if this were comfort. "He has a big house. You'll want for nothing, Sarah, nothing." What she had not said, what she had not been able to look her daughter in the eye and say, was the rest of it. That the old man was Enzo Conti, patriarch of the most powerful crime family on the eastern seaboard. That the arrangement was not employment or companionship, but marriage, a quiet civil ceremony attended by no one except a notary and 2 men with visible holsters. That the price of Diane Voss's freedom was her youngest daughter's life. Sarah had not fought it. That was the thing she could not forgive herself for, lying there in the back seat of the Mercedes as the estate emerged through the rain like a dark cathedral. She had not fought it. She had listened to her mother explain, and she had thought about the little restaurant with the red checked tablecloths and her father behind the counter. And she had said yes, because yes was the only word that had ever kept her family safe. The car stopped before a gate of wrought iron, ornate and terrible, shaped like vines that had grown too long and turned to metal. A man appeared from a guardhouse, checked something on a tablet, and waved them through without looking at her. She was cargo. She was already accounted for. The house, no, the estate, she had to recalibrate her vocabulary for this new world, rose ahead of her in the headlights. 3 stories of pale stone, all dark windows and climbing ivy, and the kind of weight that had not been built, but accumulated. Century after century of money and violence pressing down into the earth. There were lights on the ground floor. Someone was awake. The driver opened her door without speaking. Sarah stepped out into the rain, and immediately a woman appeared under an umbrella. Small, 60, with the compressed, efficient movements of someone who had served powerful people for a long time and had survived it by making herself functionally invisible. "Mrs. Conti," the woman said. The name hit Sarah in the stomach. She was not yet used to it. She might never be used to it. "Come inside," the woman continued. "Mr. Conti is waiting in the sitting room. I'm Rosa. I manage the household. If you need anything, you come to me." Sarah followed her up wide stone steps, and through a door that opened before they reached it, held by a man whose suit was too well tailored for a butler. Inside, marble floors, a staircase that curved upward into shadow, paintings on the walls that she could not yet see clearly, the scent of wood smoke and something older and darker beneath it. Money. Power. The specific odour of a place that had never had to apologize for itself. "Mr. Conti is 81, Rosa said, leading her down a corridor lined with glass cases. "He tires easily. Tonight he will speak with you briefly. Tomorrow there will be more time to become acquainted." Sarah absorbed this. She was being managed, she understood. Prepared. Delivered. The sitting room was enormous and warm, firelit, lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling, and in a chair beside the fireplace, swaddled in a wool blanket despite the season, sat Enzo Conti. He was old. Older than she had imagined, though she did not know why she had imagined anything at all. His hair was the white of old paper, his hands spotted and folded over the blanket's edge, but his eyes were still dark and sharp, and they moved over her with the deliberate calculation of a man who had been appraising people for the better part of 8 decades. "Come closer," he said. His voice was rough but resonant, accented with something old and Italian that had not been fully ground away by 60 years in New York. She came closer. She stood before him the way she had once stood before principals, before loan officers, before every authority that had shaped her life by its approval or disapproval. Still. Quiet. "You're younger than I thought," he said. "I'm 22. I know how old you are." He studied her face. "Sit down. You look like you're waiting to be executed." She almost said, "Aren't I?" But she had learned long ago which thoughts to keep behind her teeth, and she sat on the edge of the sofa across from him. "Your family's debt is cleared," he said. "I want you to understand that. The moment you walked through that gate, it was cleared. Your mother's house is her own. Whatever you came here fearing about what might happen to them, that fear is finished." She looked at him. "Thank you." He made a dismissive sound. "Don't thank me. I want a wife, not a grateful orphan. I have a household that needs a woman at its centre. I have a reputation that requires a certain appearance of stability." He paused. "I am also, as you can see, not long for this world. I want someone to receive what I leave behind with dignity. That is the transaction." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in months, and she found herself absurdly respecting him for it. "There is one other thing," Enzo said, and something shifted in the room, subtle as a change in air pressure. "My son." Sarah waited. "Luca," he said, and even the old man's voice changed at the name, tightened as if bracing. "He will not welcome you. He has his own feelings about everything, about me, about this house. I want you to understand that his feelings are not your problem. You are my wife. The house is yours. If he creates difficulty, you come to Rosa. She handles Luca." Sarah thought, no one handles Luca. She didn't know why she thought it. She didn't even know who Luca was yet. But something in the way the old man said the name, that tightening, that bracing, told her that Luca Conti was not a man who was handled. "I understand," she said. Enzo studied her a moment longer, then nodded once, as if she had passed some initial examination. "Rosa will show you your rooms. We will have dinner together tomorrow evening." He picked up a book from the side table, an unmistakable dismissal. "Sleep well, Mrs. Conti." She followed Rosa up the curving staircase and down a long corridor of closed doors, each one as silent as a held breath. Her rooms were at the east wing's end, a bedroom, a sitting room, a bathroom with marble the colour of old bone. Everything was beautiful. Everything was cold in the way that unused things are cold, things that have been prepared for occupation, but never truly lived in. Rosa left her at the door with a brief, not unkind look, and Sarah stepped into her new rooms and set her single suitcase on the floor and stood in the centre of the bedroom and did not cry, because she had promised herself she would not cry. She stood very still and listened to the rain against the windows and tried to identify the shape of the life that had just begun. It was then that she heard it. Footsteps in the corridor outside, unhurried and deliberate, moving past her door. They stopped. A pause, long enough to be intentional. Then the footsteps continued and faded and were gone. She stood alone in the lamplight and felt, for reasons she could not yet explain, as if she had just been looked at through a wall. Luca Conti had driven back to the estate from Manhattan, not because he wanted to, but because ignoring the summons any longer would have required a level of deliberate cruelty he wasn't in the mood to perform. His father sent 3 men to deliver messages when the first 2 were ignored, and Luca found coordinating the rejection of all 3 to be more work than simply showing up. He arrived at 11 at night, in the rain, in a car he drove himself, because he did not like being chauffeured, because he was always thinking about exit strategies, and exits were easier to control when you were the one behind the wheel. He had parked in the side entrance and walked through the kitchen and up the back stairs without being intercepted, which was the way he preferred it. He had stood outside the door of the east wing bedroom for 7 seconds. He had not touched the door. He had not knocked. He had simply stood there, in the dark corridor, aware of the light underneath the door and the silence beyond it, and felt the particular cold fury that had been his primary emotional register for most of his 34 years condense into something sharper and more specific. His father had bought a wife. The old man had done many things over the decades that Luca had catalogued with the meticulous patience of someone who intended, someday, to use every item on that list. But this, marrying a young woman, importing her like a piece of furniture to fill a role in this theatre of domesticity his father had always maintained alongside the empire, this was new. This was strategic in a way that made Luca's jaw tighten. Because Enzo Conti did not do anything purely for comfort. He had never done anything in his life that was not, at its core, a calculation. The frailty, the wool blanket, the firelight, all theatre. The man had survived 4 assassination attempts and a federal investigation that had lasted 11 years. He did not need a wife for warmth. So Luca stood outside her door and thought, what does she know? What has she been promised? What is she here to take? He had gone to his own rooms at the far end of the West Wing and sat in the dark and applied the same dispassionate analysis to this development that he applied to everything. He needed to know who she was. He needed to understand her leverage. He needed to map her relationship with his father before she could be used against him. And he needed to do all of this before she had time to settle into this house and begin to exert whatever influence she had been sent here to exert. He slept 3 hours and was up at 5, moving through the house in the blue pre-dawn quiet like a shadow that had learnt to walk. His morning ritual, the gym in the basement, 60 minutes of the focused, systematic physical work that was the only thing he had ever found genuinely clarifying. Then coffee in the kitchen, alone, standing at the counter, scrolling through the night's reports from his lieutenants. The empire was his in all but name. It had been his for 6 years, since Enzo's first heart attack had made it necessary to transfer actual operational control while maintaining the fiction of the old man's authority. His father held the title. Luca held the machinery. And the machinery was vast, real estate and construction on the surface, beneath it the logistics networks and the enforcement and the relationships with half the city's politicians that had been purchased over 30 years and kept current with a combination of money and the precise application of fear. What Luca had built, over the 6 years since he had taken operational control, was more efficient and more profitable than anything his father had ever run. He had also, quietly and systematically, been building the case against the old man. Not with authorities, he had no interest in the government's definition of justice, but with the families, the other bosses. The council that had existed, mostly ceremonially, for 40 years as the nominal governing structure of organized crime on the eastern seaboard. His father had made enemies, old enemies, some of them, that Luca had been cultivating with patient attention for the better part of a decade. When the time came, and the time was coming, he could feel it approaching with the inevitability of geology, Enzo Conti would be removed from his position with the support of the council, his assets would be divided, and the era of the old king would end. Luca would not mourn him. He was not sure he was capable of mourning him. He was on his second coffee when Rosa appeared. "She's awake," Rosa said by way of greeting. Luca didn't look up from his phone. "Good for her." "She asked for tea." "Then give her tea, Rosa." "I thought you might want to." "I don't." Rosa was quiet for a moment. She had worked for the Contis for 30 years, which meant she had watched Luca grow from a furious, self-contained boy into a furious, self-contained man, and she had developed, over those decades, a particular way of being silent at him that communicated everything she was too professional to say aloud. "She's very young," Rosa said. "I know. She came with nothing. One bag. She looked—" Rosa paused. "She was trying not to be frightened. You could see her trying." Luca put down his coffee cup. "Rosa." "Yes?" "She's not a stray cat." "No," Rosa agreed. "She's a person your father purchased to serve whatever purpose your father has decided she serves, and she is 22 years old, and she was delivered here in the rain last night with one bag, and I am telling you this not because I expect your sympathy, but because I expect your intelligence, which usually inclines you toward gathering information rather than dismissing it." This was, Luca thought, the longest speech Rosa had made in approximately 4 years. He picked up his coffee again. "Fine," he said. "Tell her breakfast is at 8 if she wants it. I'll be in the study." He was in the study at 8, behind the desk that had been his father's and was now, in all practical ways, his, when he heard her in the dining room across the hall. Not her voice, she was apparently as quiet as the house itself, but the small sounds of her presence, a chair, a cup, the soft, particular sound of someone moving carefully in a space they did not yet feel entitled to occupy. He told himself he would not go in. He went in. She was sitting at the far end of the long dining table, dressed simply in a pale blue sweater and dark trousers, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She was looking out the window at the wet garden. She did not hear him come in, and for a fraction of a second he observed her unobserved. The line of her profile, the dark circles she had not been able to sleep away, the way she held herself, careful, contained, as if taking up too much space was a habit she had been trained out of. Then she turned and saw him. She did not flinch, which he noted. Her face shifted, a brief flash of something he couldn't immediately name, and then she settled into stillness. "You must be Luca," she said. "And you must be the new wife," he said. She absorbed this without expression. "Sarah," she said. "My name is Sarah." He studied her the way he studied everything, with the particular quality of attention that was not quite surveillance and not quite interest, but something that had elements of both. She was, he registered this as pure information, without weight, striking. Not conventionally pretty in the manicured way of the women his father had always surrounded himself with, but striking. Dark eyes, a certain quality of stillness that was unusual in someone so young. The kind of face that held things in. "How much did he tell you?" Luca said. He crossed to the sideboard and poured himself coffee, keeping his back to her for a moment. "About what?" "About this house, about me, about what you've walked into." She considered this. "He told me you wouldn't welcome me. He told me your feelings were not my problem." Luca turned. Something that was almost amusement moved across his face, brief as weather. "That sounds like him." "Is it accurate?" "Which part?" "Either part." He looked at her with the full weight of his attention, which was, as many people had discovered, a considerable thing. "I don't welcome you," he said. "That part is accurate. As for your feelings not being your problem," he picked up his coffee. "In this house, everything is everyone's problem. That's something my father has never been willing to admit." She held his gaze. "I didn't choose this. I know. I'm not here to— I know what you're going to say," he said, and the edge in his voice was not cruelty, but warning, the voice of someone who had heard too many explanations to believe in them. "And I don't doubt that you believe it, but this is my father's house, which means everything that happens in it has a reason, and the reason is never what it appears to be. So while I'm sure you're exactly what you seem—" He paused, and the pause had a point. "I'll need some time to verify that." He left without waiting for her response. Behind him, in the dining room, Sarah sat very still with her tea and looked out at the garden and thought about what he had just said. Not the warning in it, though the warning was clear enough. The other part. The part where he had said, "I know you didn't choose this." He had believed that at least. She was not sure why it mattered that he had, but it did. Life inside the Conti estate operated according to rhythms that Sarah spent her first 2 weeks quietly mapping. Enzo rose late and retired early, his days structured around the physical requirements of a body that was failing with unhurried determination. The physician who came every Tuesday and Thursday, the medications arranged with Rosa's precision on the breakfast tray, the afternoon rest that was not called a rest, but was a rest. The business that was conducted in the study, with men who arrived and departed through a side entrance and were never introduced to her. She was expected at dinner. This was the primary domestic performance. Every evening at 7, the long table set for 2, candles lit, wine decanted. Enzo would ask her questions in the way of someone who was learning a text rather than a person. Her preferences, her history, her family, She answered honestly because there seemed no advantage in lying, and because she had the sense that Enzo, for all his age, would detect a lie the way certain animals detect illness, by some instinct that preceded cognition. He was, she had begun to understand, not a cruel man in the way she had feared. He was a transactional man, a man for whom all human relationships were ultimately arrangements. But the arrangements he made were, in his own framework, fair. He had cleared her family's debt. He had given her rooms that were more comfortable than anything she had known. He said please and thank you, with the habit of someone who had learned very early that good manners cost nothing and purchased a great deal. He had also, she recognized, given her nothing to do. The house ran itself. Rosa and her staff of 8 ensured that. There were no children to care for, no social calendar that required her participation, no role that she could identify beyond her presence at dinner and her nominal occupation of the wife's position. She was decorative. She was a placeholder. She filled a space that had been defined without reference to her. She started reading. The estate's library was extraordinary. 3,000 volumes, some of them old enough to require cotton gloves, ranging across history and law and literature and, she discovered, a surprising quantity of philosophy. She started with the novels, then moved systematically into the history, then found herself one rainy afternoon deep in a copy of Marcus Aurelius that had been underlined in 2 different hands, one old and precise, one newer and more urgent. She was reading this when Luca found her. She did not hear him come in. He moved through this house the way the house's own shadows moved, without announcement, and she only knew he was there when the light shifted, the particular shift of someone standing in a doorway. She looked up. He was in a dark suit, tie loosened, with the look of a man who had been doing the kind of work that left invisible stains. He was looking at the book in her hands. "The Meditations," he said. "The annotations are fascinating," she said. "2 different people. One of them is very angry." Something crossed his face, gone before she could identify it. "That's mine," he said, "the newer notes." She looked down at the underlined passages, the marginal notes in the tighter, more urgent hand. She had been reading his private responses to a 2,000-year-old book without knowing it. She felt something, embarrassment, but also something more complicated, the peculiar intimacy of having read someone's marginalia. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't realize. Don't apologize." He came into the room, not close, but closer, and stood looking at the shelves with a proprietary ease that told her this had always been his room more than his father's. "What have you been reading?" "Everything," she said honestly. "I don't have much else to do." "No." He pulled a volume from the shelf without looking, the automatic gesture of someone who knows exactly where everything is. "My father doesn't believe in occupation. He believes in presence." "Is that different?" He looked at her. "In his world, presence is the occupation, being there, being visible, being the thing that signals what he wants to signal." He turned the volume over in his hands. "You're the signal of stability, domestic continuity. A wife at the table suggests a man who is settled, rooted, safe. It suggests someone who has something to protect." "And does he have something to protect?" Luca's expression was very careful. "He believes he does." She watched him. He had the quality of someone who chose every word, the way a careful person crosses ice, testing each step before committing weight to it.
"You don't trust me," she said.
No.
"Will you ever?"
I haven't decided. She appreciated this, obscurely. The honesty of it, the absence of the social lubricant that would have let him soften the verdict into something more comfortable for them both. "What would it take?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "Time," he said. "Observation. Evidence. Those are the things you use to evaluate a business deal." "Everything is a deal," he said. "The only question is whether both parties know the terms." She thought about this. "My terms," she said, "are very simple. I want my family safe. I want to be treated as a person rather than an acquisition. That's the extent of my agenda." "Simple desires," he said. "Simple people have them."
"You're not simple," he said, and the observation was so flat and certain that it landed differently than a compliment would have. It landed as fact, as something he had already concluded. He replaced the book and left. She sat for a long time after, holding the meditations, tracing the urgent underlined passages with one finger. He had marked, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." She wondered what he had been trying to convince himself of. On her 15th day in the house, she made her first mistake. She had been exploring, carefully, staying to the rooms that Rosa had indicated were available to her, and had taken a wrong turn in the east wing and come through a door that she hadn't realized was unlocked into a room that was clearly an office. Not Enzo's formal study, but a working space. A room with screens and files and the functional aesthetics of someone who actually spent time there. Maps on the wall, printed documents on the desk. She had not touched anything. She had stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds before backing out and pulling the door closed behind her. But she had seen the maps. She had seen the names on the documents, city precincts, council districts, shipping terminals. She had understood, looking at those maps, that whatever Luca Conti was, he was not simply the heir to a crime family. He was something more operational than that, something more present, something that had not been retired upstairs behind a wool blanket. She said nothing about the wrong door, not to Rosa, not to Enzo. She filed it away in the part of herself that had learned, growing up in a family full of secrets, that some knowledge was safer unacknowledged. But that night at dinner, she found her eyes going to Enzo's face and asking the question she was too intelligent to ask aloud. What, exactly, was the arrangement between father and son? And which of them was she really married to? She ate her soup and said nothing, and felt the house settle around her like a hand. 3 weeks into her residence, Rosa told her there would be a function. "Mr. Conti's annual dinner," Rosa explained, laying out the details with the efficiency of a military briefing. "The families attend, business associates, politicians. Press is managed, no photographs without consent, nothing appears in the papers. But you will be present. You will be introduced. As his wife." "As his wife," Rosa confirmed. "It's at Nero." Sarah had heard of Nero. The nightclub occupied the top 3 floors of a midtown tower and had been for 15 years the most coveted reservation in the city. It was also, as anyone who paid attention understood, owned by the Contis. The veneer of exclusivity was beautiful and total,
a celebrity clientele, a chef with 3 Michelin stars, a wine list that journalists wrote about with the reverence typically reserved for art. Beneath this veneer, the money moved, the relationships were maintained, the city's power structure gathered to remind itself of its own coherence. She was given access to a dressing room on the second floor of the estate that she had not known existed, and inside it, clothes. A full wardrobe fitted to measurements that someone had taken or guessed with remarkable accuracy, arranged by occasion. Evening wear at the far end. She stood before it and felt the familiar, complicated sensation of beauty purchased as control. She was being costumed, she understood, for a role, and the costume was exquisite and entirely not hers. She chose the simplest dress, deep burgundy, long, with a neckline that was elegant rather than provocative. She wore her hair back. She wore the small diamond earrings that had been in a velvet box on the dressing table with her name on it, which she understood to be a gift from Enzo, and accepted as part of the architecture of her position. She met Enzo in the foyer at 7:30. He looked smaller outside the house, or perhaps the house had been making him larger. He examined her with the assessing look she was becoming familiar with, and nodded once with what she had learned to read as approval. Luca was already at Nero. She understood this when they arrived because the subtle realignment of attention in the private elevator told her that something had already arranged itself, that the evening had a structure she was being inserted into rather than building from scratch. The elevator opened onto the club's private floor, black marble, candlelight, the hushed, particular atmosphere of power performing casualness. And there was Luca, across the room, in conversation with 2 men who had the look of people who expected conversations to be worth their time. He was wearing black. He was always wearing black, she was coming to understand, not as an aesthetic choice, but as a refusal of decoration, a man who used clothing to subtract himself from the room rather than add. It didn't work. He was impossible to subtract. There was something about the quality of his stillness, the specific weight of his attention, that made every room he occupied organize itself around him without his having asked it to. He saw her come in. She knew because of the slight, controlled shift in his focus, not a look exactly, more the way a compass needle moves when north changes. And then he returned his attention to the men he was speaking with. She navigated the evening on Enzo's arm, introduced to names she memorized with the same care she had once memorized anatomy: Ricci, De Luca, Mancini, Ferrano. A senator, 2 judges, an investment banker whose handshake lingered a half-second too long. She smiled and said the right things and gave nothing away, and felt herself becoming, with each introduction, slightly more transparent, as if the performance were making her less real. It was near midnight when she found herself briefly alone at the bar, Enzo having been absorbed into a conversation in the far corner that excluded wives by its very geometry. She ordered water and stood looking at the city below through the floor-to-ceiling glass. All those lights, all those people living their various small and large lives without any awareness of this room and its inhabitants and the arrangements that shaped so much of what happened to them. "You're doing well." She did not turn. She had known, by the particular quality of the air beside her, that it was Luca before he spoke. "Am I?" she said. "You're remembering every name," he said. "I've been watching you. You've been cataloguing everyone in the room." Occupational habit, she said. I grew up in a restaurant. You learn to remember faces. A restaurant, he said. The word with a slight quality she couldn't decipher. My father's. He built it from nothing. She paused, and lost it the same way. Luca was quiet for a moment. He stood beside her at the glass, not quite close enough to be intimate, too close to be indifferent. She could see his reflection in the window beside hers. The name on the debt was Vos Trattoria, he said. She turned to look at him then. He was already looking at the city.
You researched me, she said. Of course. And?
And you're exactly who you appear to be. He said it without apology and without particular comfort. A girl from Queens with a dead father and a desperate mother, and no agenda beyond getting out. He paused. Which is, in this world, rarer than you'd think. She studied his profile. Is that your way of saying you've decided to trust me? It's my way of saying you're less interesting to me as a threat. He finally looked at her, and the directness of it, the full, unguarded quality of his gaze for that single instant, was like stepping into sunlight after a long interior. Which is different from trust. What's the difference? Trust is active, he said. The absence of threat is just clearance. You've been cleared. I'll try to contain my celebration. Something moved through his eyes. She thought it might have been the beginning of amusement, the very early stages of it, like light just before dawn. There's a man at the end of the bar, he said, his voice dropping half a register. Blue suit. He's been watching you for the last 20 minutes. She kept her gaze on the window. I noticed. Name is Carmine Ricci. He runs logistics for one of the New Jersey families. He's also been trying to build a relationship with my father for 2 years. Why are you telling me this? Because he's going to come speak to you, Lucas said, and when he does, be polite, be brief, and tell him nothing about your family, your history, or your life before this house. She absorbed this. Is he dangerous? Everyone in this room is dangerous, Luca said. The degree varies. A pause. Stay close to Rosa for the rest of the evening. He moved away. She watched his reflection recede in the glass and felt, against every intelligent instinct she possessed, against every understanding she had of her situation and its logic and its various terrible constraints, felt a warmth in her chest that she did not have the luxury of naming yet. Carmine Ricci came to the bar exactly 4 minutes later. She was polite. She was brief. She told him nothing. It happened gradually, the way most important things happen, not in a single crystallizing moment, but through accumulation, detail by detail, until the accumulated weight of it became impossible to pretend away. There was the morning she was running in the garden. She had discovered a walled garden behind the east wing, private, overgrown in a way that felt like intentional abandon, and had begun running the perimeter each morning for the simple animal pleasure of movement. And she had turned a corner and found Luca there, sitting on a stone bench with a coffee, reading. He had looked up. She had been startled into stopping. They had looked at each other for a moment in the early morning silence, both of them somewhere outside their usual performances, and something had passed between them that neither acknowledged. He had gone back to his book. She had resumed running. But the moment stayed with her. The quality of the light, the specific colour of his eyes in that early morning clarity, the way he had looked at her, not as a threat to be assessed or a complication to be managed, but simply as a person who had come round a corner. There was the afternoon she was in the kitchen. Rosa had been teaching her, in the patient way that Rosa taught everything, the particular recipes that the household required. The Sunday gravy that took 6 hours, the bread that was started the night before. And Luca had come through, looking for something, had stopped when he smelled the gravy, and had stood at the stove for a moment with an expression she had never seen on him before. An unguarded expression. Something that was, she thought, close to grief. "Your mother's recipe?" she asked, because she had been in this house long enough to understand that Rosa had been with the family since before Luca was born, and the recipes Rosa taught were the ones that had always been made here. "My grandmother's," he said, and then, "You don't have to learn this." "I want to," she said honestly. He had looked at her with that same compass needle shift of attention. Then he had taken a spoon from the drawer, finding it without looking, automatic familiarity, and tasted the gravy and said, "More basil," and left. She had added more basil, and something about the small instruction, the casual intimacy of it, had stayed with her longer than it should have. There was the evening Enzo had been unwell, a bad night, the physician called, oxygen required for several hours, and she had sat outside his door until Rosa came and told her he was stable, and she had been sitting in the corridor when Luca had come up the stairs at 2 in the morning and stopped when he saw her. She had been wrapped in a blanket because the corridor was cold, and she had her knees drawn up against her chest, and she was aware of how she must look, small, young, frightened, all the things she tried not to be visibly. He had not said anything for a moment. Then he had sat down on the floor of the corridor beside her, his back against the wall, and they had sat in silence together for a long time, waiting for information about whether the old man would survive the night. The silence between them had not been uncomfortable. It had been the particular silence of two people who did not need to perform for each other in the dark. "He's survived worse," Luca had said eventually. "I know." She paused. Do you want him to?" The question had come out before she could prevent it, honest and reckless, and she had felt the shift in him, the careful recalibration. "That's a dangerous question," he said. "I know." He had been quiet for a long time. "He's my father," he finally said, which was not an answer, but contained, she understood, everything he was capable of giving. She had nodded, and they had sat there until Rosa came back out and told them Enzo was asking for Luca, and Luca had risen and gone in without looking at her, and she had sat in the cold corridor alone and thought about the particular exhaustion of loving someone who had hurt you, and whether that specific exhaustion was something she and Luca Conti might have in common. The accumulation was working on both of them. She understood this when she began to notice the ways he rerouted himself through the house. Not avoiding her, but the opposite. The subtle gravitational adjustment of someone drawn toward a thing they have decided not to approach. She would be in the library and hear him in the corridor, hear him stop, hear the pause, and then he would come in. Not directly, not with stated purpose. He would come in to return a book, or to use the printer, or to look out the specific window that faced the walled garden. And he would stay longer than any of those things required, and they would talk. And the conversations had a quality that she recognized because she had read enough novels to understand it. The specific electrical quality of conversations that matter, that neither party is willing to end, that carve something out of the air between two people that wasn't there before. He had read everything. That was one of the discoveries, the slow revelations of his interiority that came in fragments like archaeological finds. He had read everything, not widely, but deeply. The same books returned to again and again, the margins filled with his thinking. He had studied law for 2 years before dropping out, not because he had failed, but because he had decided that formal education was a performance he was not interested in maintaining. He had travelled, not for pleasure, she understood, but for work, and the work had taken him to places that left marks. A scar along his left forearm from something in Naples he described in 3 words that conveyed the whole story without telling it. A quality of watchfulness in crowds that was not paranoia, but calibration. The permanent adjustment of someone who had learned to read rooms by reading the wrong rooms too late. He learned her things too, she understood. She could see him doing it, that systematic gathering. Her history, the restaurant, her father, the particular texture of her queen's childhood with its dignity and its precariousness. Her way of moving through difficulty, quiet, internal, the processing invisible until it was complete. Her relationship to beauty. She noticed beautiful things with an intensity that was almost painful, as if beauty were a debt she owed attention. He watched her notice things. She caught him watching sometimes, and he would not look away, which was new. Which was different from the early weeks when he had looked away or made the looking into something professional. She was not sleeping well. This was the body's testimony about what the mind was trying not to acknowledge, that the cold space in her bed that was all the evidence of her actual marriage was not where her thoughts went in the dark. Her thoughts went east, down the long corridor, around the corner, to the west wing and its closed door. She was appalled at herself for this, in a general, principled way that had declining force each week. She was married to his father. She said this to herself in the mirror with the regularity of someone taking medication. She was married to Enzo Conti. Luca was his son. The entire architecture of this situation was not merely complicated, but genuinely, concretely dangerous in a way that she did not have to imagine, living in this house with these men, surrounded by the evidence of what happened when lines were crossed in this world. And none of this prevented her from knowing, with increasing and devastating certainty, that she was falling in love with him. It was the map room that changed things. She had been in the house for 6 weeks when Luca, without preamble or explanation, opened the door to his working office and stood aside to let her in. She had understood immediately that this was significant. The room she had accidentally seen before, the room with the maps and the files, the nerve centre. And she had stood at the threshold for a moment because she understood that crossing it was a kind of agreement, a mutual acknowledgement of something that neither of them had stated. She crossed it. Inside, 3 screens on one wall, all dark. A desk that was functional rather than decorative, covered in organized documents. And on the far wall, the maps. Not decorative, but operational. Covered in colour-coded pins and marked routes and annotations in Luca's tight, urgent hand. "Sit down," he said. She sat in the chair across from the desk. He remained standing, studying her with an expression she was beginning to read more accurately, the focused quality of a man making a decision he has already made, but is testing one final time. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room," he said. "All right." "I'm not asking for your word," he said. "I'm telling you the terms." "I understand the terms." He sat then, across from her, with the desk between them, and laid out the situation with the same flat clarity he brought to everything. The empire, his father's declining health, and the question of succession, the council and its interests, the specific, patient construction of a case that would allow the families to withdraw their support from Enzo without triggering the kind of destabilization that cost lives. She listened without interrupting, because she understood that interrupting would cost her the information, and the information mattered for reasons she was only beginning to assemble. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked when he had finished. "Because you're going to be in this house for the duration," he said. "And because you're not stupid, which means you've already assembled most of it. I'd rather you have the accurate version than your version. And because you need something from me." He looked at her without evasion. "Yes." "What?" "Access," he said. "My father speaks to you at dinner every evening. He tells you things. I don't know what specifically, but he talks to you the way he talks to no one else in this house anymore. I want to know what he tells you." She was quiet for a moment. "You want me to spy on your father?" "I want you to share information that might be relevant." That's a very elegant way to say yes. He almost smiled. "Will you do it?" She thought about this with the care it deserved. She was not naive about what he was asking. She was not naive about the fact that this conversation was itself a form of the manipulation she had been warned in various indirect ways to expect from him. She had been told by Enzo and by the logic of this house itself that Luca was a man with an agenda. She had known this. She had held it in her awareness as a counterweight to the drawing she felt toward him. And yet... "I'll tell you what I think is relevant," she said carefully. "I won't report on him the way a spy would. I won't inventory his conversations. But if he tells me something that I think you should know, something that matters for the people in this house or for the people outside it, I'll tell you." That's less than I asked for. I know, it's what I can offer. He looked at her for a long time. "Why the distinction?" "Because he's an old man," she said. "He may have done terrible things, he probably has, but he is genuinely kind to me, and I'm not going to betray that kindness wholesale just because—" She stopped. "Because what?" he said quietly. She met his eyes. "Because I want you to trust me," she said, "and I'd like to actually deserve it." The silence that followed was of a different quality than any silence they had shared before. It was not comfortable or uncomfortable, but charged. A silence that was doing the work of a sentence neither of them was going to say. "All right," he said finally. His voice was slightly different, just slightly. "Your terms." She nodded and stood to leave. She was at the door when he said her name. She turned. He was still at the desk, watching her. "The map in the corner," he said. "The one with the blue pins." She looked at it. The blue pins were in Queens, concentrated in a small area she recognized. "That's my neighborhood," she said. "I know." She looked at him. "Those are all the properties that were leveraged against your family's debt," he said. "Over the past 3 years, I've been clearing them, quietly. The people who owned those debts, they no longer own them. Most of those notes have been voided." She stood very still. "Why?" He did not answer for a long moment. When he did, it was not an answer to the literal question. "You should go," he said. "It's nearly dinner." She went. She walked down the long corridor and turned the corner and stood alone in the east wing for a moment, with her back against the wall, pressing her palms flat against the cool plaster, eyes closed, breathing. He had cleared the debts, not her family's. That had been the price of her presence here, Enzo's transaction. But the surrounding debts, the neighbourhood debts, the web of financial entanglement that had made her family's situation possible in the first place, he had been quietly dismantling it. She did not know what to do with this information, except to hold it carefully, the way you hold something very delicate that you cannot yet afford to set down. The fight between Luca and Enzo came at the end of the second month, on a Tuesday, when a cold front moved across the city and the sky went the colour of iron and stayed that way. Sarah did not hear it happen. She was in the library when it began, and by the time the sounds reached her, raised voices, one rough and old, one controlled and hard, both carrying the specific tonality of a conflict that had a very long history, she understood that she was not meant to intervene, and she stayed where she was, with her book closed in her lap, and listened to the architecture of a family. She could not make out the words. She learned the shape of it from other sources, from Rosa, who was not given to gossip, but who answered direct questions with the economy of someone who understood that information, properly deployed, was a form of protection. From the quality of the house afterward, which settled into a particular tense silence, like the silence after a tree falls. From Enzo at dinner, who was quieter than usual, and who ate without appetite, and who looked, for the first time in her presence, his age. "Luca and I disagreed," he said, near the end of the meal, as if she had asked. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be." He turned his wineglass without lifting it. "We disagree about many things. It is the nature of the relationship." He paused. "He is very capable, the most capable person I have ever known, and I have known many capable people. He does not require He does not need me the way he once did." She understood this was important, that he was giving her something he rarely gave, some genuine admission, and she received it carefully. "Does he know you think that?" Enzo made a dry sound. "He would not believe it." "Why?" "Because I spent a great deal of his childhood telling him the opposite." He picked up the wine now and drank. "A man can be wrong, Mrs. Conti, even a man like me. He can be wrong and discover it too late, and find there is no corrective available except time. And time is... I am running low on time." She did not say anything because there was nothing useful to say, and Enzo, she had learned, did not want comfort so much as witness. She found Luca in the walled garden that evening, after Enzo had retired. He was standing in the far corner where the old rose bushes grew unpruned against the stone wall, and he was smoking. She had not known he smoked. It seemed deliberate, hidden, and he held the cigarette with the focused attention of someone using the small act to contain something large. She should have gone back inside. She walked toward him. He heard her on the gravel and turned. He did not say anything. In the lamplight from the house, his face was tired in a way it never was during the day, the controlled surfaces slightly down, the effort of maintenance briefly visible. "I didn't know you smoked," she said. "I don't," he said, "except occasionally." She stood a few feet from him. "Do you want to be alone?" "No," he said, which surprised her. She stood beside him in the dark garden while he finished the cigarette, and the city glowed over the wall in its pink-orange haze, and the old rose bushes made their dark shapes against the stone. "He said you were right about something," she said eventually. "He didn't tell me what, but he said you were capable." Luca looked at her. "He said that?" "Not exactly those words, but that was the shape of it." He looked away. She could see the muscles in his jaw working, the internal processing of something that cost him. "He said it too late," Luca said. "Maybe," she said, "but he said it." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you should know." She paused. "Not as information, just because." He turned to look at her, and they were close. Closer than they had ever been outside of public performance. The specific closeness of a garden at night, where the dark had adjusted the rules. She could see the precise line where the lamplight caught the angle of his cheekbone. She could see the careful control in his eyes, and beneath it, in the unguarded exhaustion of the evening, something else. Hunger. Not for her specifically, or not only. Hunger for something that this life, with its armour and its calculation, had not supplied. That particular starvation that specific people suffer. The ones who have learned to want nothing, because wanting was always punished. She knew that hunger. She lived inside it. "Seda," he said, her name in his mouth, with that specific quality it always had now, careful, weighted, the word doing more work than names usually did. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what?" "Don't say whatever you were going to say next," she said, "because I think we both know we're standing very close to something we can't come back from, and we're both intelligent enough to know that." He was very still. And I'm not. I need more time to think." "About what?" "About whether thinking is still useful," she admitted. Something moved across his face that she had no name for yet. Something that was beyond amusement and beyond softness. Something more complex and more dangerous than either. He took one step back, creating a careful inch of additional distance, a deliberate and controlled retreat. "Go inside," he said. She went inside. She lay in her bed that night and stared at the ceiling and counted the reasons. She counted them carefully, with the thoroughness of someone who knows that an incomplete count is the most dangerous kind. She was married to his father. She was here under economic coercion. He was using her for information. He had admitted this. His ultimate goal was to dismantle everything his father had built, which presumably included the arrangements his father had made, which included her. Any attachment formed in this house was formed inside a structure of power and constraint and calculation that made genuine choice essentially meaningless. She counted to 11 reasons and then stopped counting because 11 was enough to know that nothing was going to change what was happening. It happened on a Wednesday in November, in the library, at 10:30 in the morning, when the house was quiet in the particular way it was quiet on the days Enzo's physician was present, and the household arranged itself around that fact. She had been reading in the window seat, the east window, the one that looked onto the walled garden, and received the morning light at an angle that made the room very still and very beautiful, when Luca came in. This was not unusual. He came to the library often now, in the mornings, and they worked in a comfortable, parallel silence that had become, without either of them naming it, the best part of her day. He sat across the room with his own work. She heard the familiar sounds of him, the particular quality of his focus, the occasionally turned page, the single sharp breath he gave sometimes when he found something significant. At some point the morning had moved, and she had put down her book and was looking out the window at the garden where the last of the autumn roses had gone, the canes bare and dark against the old stone, and she had been thinking, honestly, carefully, with the part of herself that she kept trying to use, about the conversation she'd had with herself the night in the garden, and the 11 reasons, and whether the existence of 11 reasons was itself a symptom of the problem, rather than a solution to it. "You've stopped reading," he said. She looked over. He was watching her. "I was thinking," she said. "About?" "Whether intelligent people in genuinely foolish situations are more or less foolish than unintelligent people in the same situations," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Because they know better." "Yes. That's not foolishness," he said. "That's just a harder version of the same thing." She looked at him. He had closed his files. He was fully present with her in the room, the focused quality of his attention directed at her completely. And she thought about the garden and the 11 reasons and the accumulation of 2 months of careful nearness and thought. "I have thought about this enough." She stood up. She crossed the room. She was aware of every step, the way you are aware of steps when they matter. The specific weight of each footfall, the carpet under her feet, and the morning light, and the 6 feet of distance becoming 4, becoming 2, becoming... She stopped in front of him, and he had not moved, had not reached for her or shifted toward her, just sat and watched her come, with an expression that was so carefully controlled, it was its own kind of honesty. The control itself being the message, that he was containing something enormous. "I've thought about it," she said. Her voice was steady. "I've been thinking about it for weeks. I know all the reasons why this is a terrible idea." "So do I," he said. His voice was very low. "And I've decided that thinking is finished," she said. He rose, slowly, in the single fluid movement of a man who has extraordinary physical control and was currently using all of it. He rose until he was standing before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and looked down at her with the full weight of everything he had been containing. "If I do this," he said, "I cannot. There is no version of this that is simple." "I know." "This house," he said, "my father." "I know," she said again. "You'll be in danger," he said, and it was the most honest thing he had said, because it was the only thing he said that he clearly did not want to say. "I'm already in danger," she said. "I've been in danger since the night I arrived. At least this kind is..." She stopped. "What?" "Mine," she said quietly. "At least this is something I'm choosing." He looked at her for a long moment with those dark, careful, hungry eyes, and she saw the moment he made the decision, the slight shift in him, the lowering of the last defence. And then he lifted one hand and touched her face, just her face, his thumb against her cheekbone, the most careful possible contact, with a gentleness that she had not expected from him, and that undid her more completely than any force could have. He kissed her. It was not a desperate kiss or a violent one. It was the kiss of someone who has been waiting a very long time, and is, now that the waiting is over, in no hurry at all, deliberate, thorough, as if he were learning something he intended to remember permanently. His hand moved from her face to the back of her head, holding her there with the same controlled care, and she put her hands against his chest and felt his heartbeat, which was not controlled at all, rapid and enormous, a body's honesty about what the face had been carefully withholding. When they stopped, they stood with their foreheads together in the morning light, both of them breathing. "Sarah," he said. "Don't apologize," she said quickly. "I wasn't going to," he said, and the slight, ragged quality in his voice, the hairline fracture in his control, was the most intimate thing she had ever heard. She pulled back enough to look at him. His expression had changed, some fundamental rearrangement of the interior, the hard, clean lines of him softened not into weakness, but into something more complicated and more human. "What happens now?" she asked. He looked at her with that precise, assessing gaze, and she saw the calculation there. He was always calculating. It was as natural as breathing. But beneath it, something else, something that the calculation was working around rather than replacing. "We're careful," he said. "How careful?" "Absolute," he said. "In this house, in front of everyone, Rosa, my father, the staff, anyone who comes through those gates. Nothing. Nothing that wasn't there before. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Can you do that?" She thought about the years she had spent being careful, managing her face, keeping her interior life behind her teeth. "Yes," she said. "Can you?" Something that was genuinely amusement moved through his eyes then, the full version, unguarded, the first time she had seen it, and it transformed him so completely that she felt the impact of it physically. "Probably not," he said honestly, "but I'll try." She stepped back. The distance between them reasserted itself, the professional blankness of the house's ordinary day. She picked up her book. He picked up his files. The library settled around them in its morning quiet. But the air had changed. It had the particular quality of changed air, the way a room feels after lightning, after something that cannot be undone. She was glad it could not be undone. They built the secret with the care that secrets require, which is to say, with exhausting and constant vigilance, because the architecture of concealment is the most demanding architecture there is, requiring attention to every surface and no room for error. The house was not empty. It had 9 permanent staff in addition to Rosa. It had security, 3 men who worked rotating shifts, who knew the house the way soldiers know terrain, who had been in Enzo's employ long enough to understand that their continued employment rested on their continued attentiveness. It had Enzo himself, whose physical decline had not impaired his intellect, and who had spent 60 years reading rooms full of people who were trying to deceive him. And it had, increasingly, visitors. The approach of the succession question had begun drawing the families like a weather system, slow and irresistible. Men coming and going, lunches and dinners and late meetings in the study that kept the security awake past midnight. The house was more occupied than it had been when she arrived, and the occupation had a quality of attention, a watchfulness, that she felt on her skin like a change in temperature, so they were careful. In the common spaces of the house, they were what they had always been, cautiously civil. A nod in the corridor, a brief word over coffee, the minor social acknowledgements of 2 people who cohabit without particular warmth. She performed this with the practiced ease of someone who had spent a childhood managing the presentation of her interior life, and she watched Luca perform it with a precision that told her how much practice he had had at being one thing on the surface and something entirely other underneath. Their time was stolen from the house's routines, an hour in the walled garden after the security's 10 o'clock check, the darkness providing cover, and the cold providing an excuse for the brevity of the encounter. The library on mornings when Enzo was with his physician, a car once, Luca's own, the one he drove himself, parked in an underground garage in Midtown while the city went about its business 3 floors above them, and they sat in the front seats and talked for 2 hours with the engine off, the windows fogging slowly with their breath. These were conversations that built something. She had loved people before, her father, her mother in the complicated way of daughters, but she had not known this kind, the specifically intimate construction of a shared interior world, the way 2 people who speak honestly to each other create, over time, something that belongs to neither of them individually. He told her about Naples, where his mother was from, where he had spent summers as a child before his mother died and the summers ended. He told her about the law school years, the particular revelation of constitutional law, the way he had understood in reading Marbury versus Madison that power was always provisional, always contingent on the consent of the people who held the balance. He told her, carefully, partially, about the 6 years since he had taken operational control of the empire, the specific moral accommodations he had made and the ones he had refused, the line he had drawn and the cost of drawing it. She told him about her father's restaurant on the winter nights when the tables were all set and the kitchen was going and her father was singing in the back. He sang constantly, tunelessly, with enormous conviction. And the particular beauty of that, a small world that was entirely theirs, that owed nothing to anyone. She told him about the year after her father died, the 4 a.m. anxiety that came without warning like a tide, the way she had learned to work through it rather than away from it. She told him about the morning she had said yes to her mother's proposal, not the words, but the quality of the moment, the particular silence before the word in which she had felt the exact shape of everything she was giving up. "Did you hate her for asking?" he said. "No," she said. "I couldn't. She was drowning." "But I was also drowning," she said. "We were drowning together. This was the only way to stop." She paused. "I've stopped being angry about it. There's a kind of, it sounds terrible to say, but there's a kind of relief in having had the choice removed. I didn't choose this house. I didn't choose your father. I didn't choose—" She stopped. "What?" "You," she said quietly. "I didn't choose any of it, which means I also didn't choose wrong." He was quiet for a moment. "You could leave," he said, and the flatness with which he said it told her that the flatness was costing him. "When this is over, when my father's position changes, you'll have choices, real ones." "I know," she said. "That's not what I mean." "Then what do you mean?" She looked at him in the dark of the car, with the city's orange light on his face, and thought, "What I mean is that this, whatever it is mine. For the first time in years, something is mine." She said, "I mean that being here, with you, right now, I chose that. That part I chose." He looked at her with the full weight of everything he was, and she could see in the quality of that look what it meant to him, the specific relief of being seen that clearly by someone, the profound exhaustion of the alternative. He said her name the way he sometimes said it, with that particular weight. And then he kissed her, and the city moved above them, indifferent and brilliant, going about its enormous business, while they remained in their small, private dark. She was happy, she realized, in the midst of a situation that was genuinely precarious, in a house owned by a man she was technically married to, falling in love with his son in stolen hours and guarded moments. She was, underneath all of it, quietly and persistently happy. She knew this could not last. Everything she understood about this world told her it could not last. But she had read enough of the Meditations to know that what cannot last is not therefore without value, that the temporariness of a thing is not an argument against it, but simply its nature, the honest condition of all beautiful things. She held on to this. She held on to Luca. She understood that both of these were the same gesture. Marco De Luca arrived in December on the pretext of a business dinner and stayed for 3 days. He was 38, handsome in the broad, confident way of men who had always received attention for it, and he moved through the estate with the ease of someone who had been here before and expected to be comfortable. He had been, Luca told her in the garden the night before Marco's arrival, one of the 3 men most likely to contest the succession. Not to claim it himself, he ran his own family, the De Lucas of Boston, and had no interest in New York, but as a kingmaker. His support for whichever candidate emerged would be influential. "Watch him," Luca said, not a warning, she had learned to understand the difference. Not watch out for him. Watch him. Observe, catalogue, file. "Why does he want what your father has?" she asked. "He doesn't want what my father has," Luca said. "He wants what I have. The operational infrastructure, the port access, the real estate portfolio." He paused. "He would support my succession if I agreed to certain terms." "Do you want his support?" "I want his neutrality more," Luca said. "Support creates obligation." She nodded, filed this, and the next morning received Marco De Luca at breakfast with the pleasant neutrality of a woman who had been educated by 2 months in this house to present surfaces that revealed nothing. He was charming. This was his primary characteristic, a warm, practiced, enveloping charm that was designed to establish intimacy quickly and then use that intimacy. She recognized it because she had met the variety of it before, in salespeople and certain politicians and her mother's second cousin who had borrowed money from the family 4 times and never returned it. The warm people, she had learned, bore watching more carefully than the cold ones. The cold ones were honest about their edges. "You're nothing like I expected," Marco said to her over breakfast on his second morning. Luca was not present. Enzo had taken to sleeping later and later. "What did you expect?" she asked. "Someone more decorative." He said this with a smile that was designed to be a compliment. "More obviously acquired. He usually picks for ornament." He, Enzo. She noted the use of the impersonal pronoun, its particular quality of diminishment. "I think Mr. Conti's tastes are more complex than that," she said pleasantly. Marco leaned forward. "And what are your tastes, Mrs. Conti?" "In what sense?" "In any sense you like." She looked at him with the kind of direct, calm gaze she had been practicing. "I'm not sure I know you well enough to discuss my tastes, Mr. De Luca." He smiled with genuine appreciation. You're going to be interesting to know. She smiled back with the precise warmth of someone who has decided exactly how warm to be, and no warmer. I hope you have a productive visit. She reported this conversation to Luca that evening in the walled garden, when the house was quiet and the cold was sharp enough to make the breath visible. He was feeling you out, Luca said. I know. For what? For leverage, Luca said. If he can establish a relationship with you, if he has any information about you, any vulnerability, he has something to use against my father's position, against mine. His jaw was tight. What did you tell him? Nothing. Exactly nothing. He looked at her. Good. Luca, she paused, he's going to keep trying. He's been in the house 3 days, and he's eaten every meal near me, and I've watched him recalibrate his approach each time. She pulled her coat tighter. He's looking for something specific. What makes you say that? The questions, she said. They're not random. They all circle around the same territory. My life before, my family, how I came to be here. He knows the debt story, the public version. He's looking for the private one. Luca was very still. He's looking for coercion, he said flatly. If he can establish that the marriage was coercive, which it was, technically, under any honest reading, he has grounds to challenge its legitimacy, which challenges the estate distribution, which challenges the succession arrangement. She absorbed this. Does that affect your position? If my father dies without a clean succession, yes, significantly. He paused, and she saw the calculation moving behind his eyes. He came here to find you. Yes, she said quietly. I thought so. The silence between them had an unfamiliar quality, protective. She realized, identifying it, that this was the first time she had actively brought him information, not because it was the right thing to do, or because she had promised to, but because she did not want him caught off guard. He reached out and touched her face in the dark, brief and precise, the way he touched her when they were somewhere they might be seen, and he was taking a calculated risk, measuring the dark and finding it sufficient. He's leaving in the morning, Lucas said. Stay away from him until he does. I had already decided that, she said. He studied her for a moment, then, you knew what he was looking for, and you managed it yourself before telling me. Yes. You didn't need me to tell you what to do. I rarely do, she said, not harshly. The almost smile moved through his eyes. He dropped his hand. Go inside, he said. You're cold. So are you. I'm always cold, he said, with a particular quality she had come to understand meant something different from what it appeared to mean. I'm used to it. She went inside and she did not look back, and she felt behind her the specific warmth of a man who was used to cold and was finding, with difficulty and without the vocabulary for it, that this was no longer entirely true. Rosa knew. Sarah understood this the way she understood many things in this house. Not through a single revealing moment, but through the accumulation of evidence, small and various. The way Rosa's movements through the library rerouted on the mornings Luca was there. The way she arranged the garden schedule so that the evening security check happened earlier on certain nights, creating a longer, dark window. The way she once, and only once, said to Sarah while folding linens, "This house has many windows. Most of them look inward as well as out." She had said nothing else. She had folded the linen with her characteristic efficiency and changed the subject without perceptibly changing the subject. Sarah thought about this for 3 days before deciding that Rosa was not a threat. She arrived at this conclusion through a careful assessment of Rosa's history, her relationships within the household, and the specific quality of the intervention, which had been, unmistakably, a warning issued not with malice, but with the protective precision of someone who has watched powerful people hurt people for 30 years and has developed a system of quiet interventions wherever possible. She went to Rosa. She found her in the kitchen on a Sunday morning, the gravy on the stove in its early stage, the radio playing softly. "You know," Sarah said.
Rosa stirred the gravy with focused attention. "Know what, Mrs. Conti?" Rosa. A pause. Then Rosa set down the spoon and turned. Her expression was what it always was, competent, contained, with the particular quality of someone who has weathered much and intends to weather more. "I know many things about this house," Rosa said. "That is my job." "And this? What do you do with this?" "Nothing," Rosa said. "That is also my job. Knowing without acting is a skill people in my position develop out of necessity." Sarah studied her. "Why are you protecting us?" Rosa was quiet for a moment. She looked at the gravy, looked back. "I'm not protecting you," she said. "I am managing the situation in the way that causes the least harm to the most people. This is different." "What's the difference?" "Protection implies I have taken a side," Rosa said. "I have not taken a side. I am managing the dynamics of this household in the way I judge to be best for the household's long-term stability." She paused. "I have been with the Contis for 30 years. I have seen many things. I have accommodated many things. What I will not accommodate is unnecessary suffering." She said this very quietly, with the weight of specificity. "Mr. Luca has sufficient suffering built into the structure of his life, as do you. I see no reason to add to it." Sarah looked at her for a long time. "He doesn't know you know." "No. Should I tell him?" Rosa picked up the spoon. "That is your decision. I would tell you only that Mr. Luca's relationship with the concept of being managed, even protectively, is complicated." A pause. "He will feel surveilled. He will be angry. He will feel surveilled," Rosa repeated, with a precision that indicated this was a more accurate diagnosis. "He spends his life being watched by people with agendas. The idea that someone has been watching him." She turned back to the stove. "Tell him if you think it's right, but choose your moment." Sarah chose her moment 3 days later, in the car, parked in the Midtown garage, the windows fogging. She told him simply, without build-up, "Rosa knows. Rosa has been protecting the situation. Rosa has not told Enzo." He received this information with the stillness that was his version of intense emotion. She watched the processing move across his face, the initial hardening, the slight tightening around the eyes that she had come to read as the first stage of anger, and then, slowly, with visible effort, the recalibration. "How long?" he said. "I don't know. Long enough to have adjusted the security schedule." She adjusted the... He stopped. He looked at the fogged window. He was quiet for so long that the silence took on a specific texture. "She loves you," Sarah said quietly. "That's what I understand from it. She's been watching out for you for 30 years, and she sees you, and us, and she's chosen to help." "She's chosen to know something that could get her killed," he said, and the anger was back,
the specific anger of someone who has spent years trying to minimize the number of people exposed to risk by his choices. She was already in that position, Sarah said. She's known things about this house for 30 years that could get her killed. One more thing doesn't change the math. He was quiet again. Then, unexpectedly, she adjusted the security schedule. Yes. Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile and not quite grief, but something between them. She's been doing that for how long? I think since the beginning. He looked at his hands. She used to walk me to school, he said, after my mother died. For a year, until I told her I was too old. She stopped. She never made me feel bad about it. He paused. I've never thought about how much she's seen. Maybe it's time to. He looked at her, and the look had a quality that was becoming familiar to her. The specific quality of a man who has spent his life in a world that stripped him of softness, discovering, repeatedly and with some confusion, that he still had it. I'll talk to her, he said. I know, she said. He reached across and took her hand, deliberately, in the middle of the day in a parked car where anyone could walk past and see. He held it, with the specific, careful pressure of someone who is learning that what they are holding matters. January brought a cold that settled into the estate like a permanent resident, and with it, a change in Enzo that Sarah observed with the practiced attention she brought to everything in this house. He was withdrawing, not from her. Their dinners continued, their conversations, the careful reciprocal exchange of an old man and a young woman, finding, against all the odds of their arrangement, something that was not quite warmth, but was in the vicinity of it. He withdrew from the business. The meetings in his study became less frequent. The men who came and went through the side entrance began, she noticed, to ask for Luca instead, redirected by Rosa with an ease that suggested the redirection had been prepared for. He knew, she understood, at some level, with some part of the intelligence that had built and maintained this empire for 40 years, he knew that what was coming, and he had made some internal decision she could not fully read. Not resignation. Enzo Conti was not a man who resigned. Something more complex, something that might have been, if she squinted at it with generosity, a kind of clearing. He gave her things, not extravagantly. Enzo was not an extravagant man, but with intention. Her mother's debt, confirmed in writing, delivered through Rosa with no ceremony. Access to a bank account that was hers alone, with a balance that was large enough to be meaningful and came with no stated condition. A book from the library, one of the oldest, a collection of Italian poetry, 19th century, the inscription on the flyleaf in a hand that was not Enzo's. For my son, who loves words he pretends not to love. She held this last one for a long time. Then she went to find Luca. He was in his working office, the map room, at the desk with 3 phones and a complexity of documents. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and his face went through the rapid recalibration she was learning to read. The public neutrality, then the private adjustment, then the specific quality of attention he reserved for her. What? He said. She held out the book. He looked at it. He did not move for a moment. Then he stood and crossed the room and took it from her hands, and she watched him read the inscription. His face did something complicated. My father gave you this, he said. He sent it with Rosa this morning. Why? I don't know, she said honestly. But I think he's making peace with something. Luca looked at the inscription for a long time. His thumb moved over the handwriting the way she moved her thumb over things she was trying to understand. She had noticed this, that they shared this gesture, the tactile approach to meaning, as if truth had texture. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "I looked for it after she died. I thought it was lost." "He kept it." "He kept it," Luca repeated, and the flatness of the repetition contained everything he was not going to say, that this was both an act of love and an act of possession, that his father had always held the things that were valuable to others as a form of insurance, that even this small kindness was inseparable from the long machinery of control that had shaped both of them. But he held the book. She touched his arm, briefly, and he turned and looked at her with an openness that came out of the disruption, the specific vulnerability of the unexpected. "He's dying," she said softly. "I know. And there's going to be a fight," she said, "when it happens. The De Lucas, the Ferrano family, whoever else has been circling. It's going to be complicated and dangerous, and I know all of this," he said. He covered her hand with his, on his arm. "Sarah." "What?" "I know." His voice was low, precise. "I have been planning for this for 6 years. I know every piece of what comes next." "And us?" she said. "What comes next for us?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the calculation she always saw, but behind it, deep behind it, the way things are when they have been put away very carefully, something that was neither calculation nor performance. "I don't know," he said. And then, "That's not evasion. I genuinely don't know. I've never—" He stopped. "Never what?" "I've never factored something I couldn't afford to lose into a plan before," he said. "I don't know how to do it." She understood what this meant. She understood the cost of saying it. "Then we figure it out," she said. "Together." He looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at her face. He said, very quietly, as if it were a secret he was only now telling himself, "All right." The fracture in the plan, the fracture in his careful, architected 6-year plan, was her. And he had just admitted it, and neither of them was quite sure whether to be terrified or relieved. They were both, she thought, simultaneously, completely, and without any prospect of undoing it. The man's name was Vitale, and he had been with the Conti security detail for 7 years, and he had been in Marco De Luca's pocket for 2 of them. Sarah did not know any of this when she encountered him in the corridor outside Luca's working office on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after Marco's visit. She had been leaving, and they had been together for an hour, talking through the mechanics of the succession, Luca sharing more of the plan than he had before, both of them past the pretense that she was not deeply involved. And she had come out into the corridor and found Vitale there. He was not supposed to be in this wing at this hour. She knew the security schedule because she had learned it carefully, the way she had learned everything in this house. She gave him nothing. She said good evening with the pleasant blankness she had developed for exactly these encounters, and she walked down the corridor and down the stairs and to her own rooms without looking back. She sent a text to Luca's private phone, the number he had given her on a piece of paper that she had memorized and destroyed, that said only, "Vitale, East Corridor, 9:47 p.m. His response came 4 minutes later. "Stay in your rooms tonight." She did. She lay in her bed, listening to the sounds of the house, and thought about what a man in the east corridor at the wrong time might have seen. A light under the office door, perhaps. The sound of voices. Her coming out. 2 days later, Luca told her. "Vitale is gone," he said. They were in the garden, the cold sharp enough to see their breath. "He's been removed from the detail." "You fired him?" "He was asked to leave," Luca said, which she understood was not the same thing, and did not press. He'd been providing information to De Luca about the household schedule, about who was where, when. "For how long?" "Long enough." His jaw was tight. "I've had him watched for a month. I needed enough evidence to act." "What did he see?" she asked, "in the corridor?" "Probably enough to be suspicious, not enough to be certain." He looked at her. "I need to ask you something directly." "All right." "Are you afraid?" She thought about this honestly. "I'm not afraid of De Luca," she said. "I'm afraid of what happens if he establishes something he can take to your father." "My father would not." He stopped. "Luca." He was quiet for a long moment. The cold moved between them. "I don't know what my father would do," he said finally, and the admission was clearly costly. He is capable of love, I believe, but he is also capable of violence that has nothing to do with love. And his pride." He stopped again. "His pride is the thing that has destroyed the most." She held his gaze. "If he found out?" "Yes." "What would he do?" "To me," Luca said, "he might do nothing. He might do everything. With my father, the action is never predictable, only the feeling behind it, which is always the same." He paused. "To you?" "Don't," she said. "I need you to understand the risk." "I understand the risk," she said, more sharply than she intended. "I've understood it since the beginning. I don't need it enumerated." He looked at her with the particular look that meant she had surprised him. Then, "The reason I need you to understand it is because I need to ask you to be even more careful, more than before. This situation with Vitale, it means someone is actively looking." "I know." "It means no more." He stopped. "No more?" His expression was controlled and very careful. "No more of what we've been doing. Not here. Not until I've resolved the situation with De Luca." She absorbed this. She thought about the library mornings and the garden evenings and the car in the midtown garage and what it meant to give those up temporarily under the specific conditions of a house that had become dangerous. "How long?" she asked. "I don't know." "Luca, I genuinely don't know," he said. "A week, maybe, if the situation with De Luca resolves cleanly." He paused. "Or longer, if it doesn't." She nodded. She was not, she discovered, afraid. She was steady, the specific steadiness that comes not from the absence of fear, but from having decided that fear is not the governing principle. "One thing," she said. "What?" "Whatever happens," she said, "whatever your father finds out or doesn't find out, whatever De Luca does or doesn't do, I need you to know that I don't regret any of it." He looked at her for a long time. "Neither do I," he said. And the simplicity of it, no qualification, no calculation, just those 3 words in the cold air, was the most complete thing he had ever said to her. They went inside separately. The house received them both in its careful silence. The danger, she knew, was only beginning. But she was no longer afraid of it. She had passed, somewhere in the past weeks, into a different relationship with her own fear, had found beneath it something more durable, a kind of core that had not been there before, or had been there, and had simply been waiting to be reached. She went to her rooms. She was careful. She was patient. She waited. She found the letter on a Friday morning in February on the small table beside her door, in an envelope that bore her name in Enzo's handwriting, the writing she had learned to recognize, large and careful, with the slight tremor that had appeared in the last few weeks. She stood in her doorway holding it for a moment, feeling its weight, which was heavier than a single sheet. Then she took it to the window seat and opened it. It was 4 pages, handwritten, beginning without salutation. I am old enough to know what I know, and wise enough to admit what I do not. What I know, that this house carries more than its walls. What I do not know, whether the things it carries are worth the weight. She read slowly, with the complete attention the writing required. It was not a confession in any legal sense. Enzo was too careful for that, too practiced at the arts of deniability. But it was something more intimate than anything he had said to her at their nightly dinners. It was a reckoning, the kind an old man conducts when the arithmetic of his remaining time becomes undeniable. He wrote about her arrival. He wrote about the transaction clearly, without euphemism, that he had acquired her, that he had known it was an acquisition, that he had justified this to himself with the reasoning he applied to all his decisions, that he provided what he promised, that his contracts were always honoured, that the life he offered was materially superior to what she had. He wrote, "But a cage made of gold is still a cage, and I have known this for 30 years and declined to act on it because it did not serve my interests to act on it. And I am finding, at the end of things, that the catalogue of what did not serve my interests to acknowledge is very long." He wrote about Luca. She read this section twice, slowly. "He is the best thing I have built, and I built him the way I build everything, through pressure, through withholding, through the assumption that strength is formed by the denial of softness. I was wrong about this. I have been wrong about this for 34 years, and I can see now, with the clarity that terminal illness provides, exactly the shape and cost of the error." He wrote, "I do not know what is between you. I am an old man, not a fool. I have eyes. I have watched the two of you not look at each other, and I have understood what the not looking means, because I am the person who taught my son to not look at things he is not supposed to want." She put the letter down. She looked out at the walled garden, the February garden, bare and waiting. She picked the letter up again. "What I want to say to you, Sarah, and I am aware that I have no right to say it, is this. Whatever is between you, do not let the fear of my judgment destroy it. I am past judgment. I am past most things. What I am not past is the understanding that I have spent 60 years as the impediment between people and the things they needed, and I would prefer, in whatever time remains, not to be that. I am transferring the title of this house to Luca. He does not know this yet. The documentation is with my attorney, to be enacted upon my death or incapacitation. I am also ensuring that you have the resources to make whatever choice you wish to make when the time comes. These are not acts of guilt, though guilt is present. They are acts of, I think the word is clarity. The letter ended. You deserve more than you have been given. So does he. I hope you both find the courage to take it. There was no signature. There didn't need to be. She sat in the window seat for a long time with the letter in her hands. The February light moved across the floor. The house made its quiet sounds around her. Then she took out her phone and sent Luca a message. Come to the garden at noon, please. He was there. She gave him the letter without saying anything, and she watched him read it, standing in the cold with the pages in his hands, the winter light on his face. She watched him read the part about himself. She watched his face do what it always did when something mattered too much to process cleanly. Go very still, the stillness of deep water. When he finished, he looked up. He knows, Luca said. He knows. And he wrote. He stopped. He looked at the last page. He's giving you the house, she said. He wrote. I read it, Luca said quietly. They stood in the February garden in the cold, and she watched something shift in him, some enormous and long-carried weight shift position. Not lift, not vanish, but alter, the way a thing changes when someone else acknowledges it. He had been carrying his father's judgment for 34 years, and now the judge himself had rewritten the verdict. Too late and too little, and still, somehow, enough to change something. He folded the letter. He held it. He said very quietly, he was never going to say it to my face. No, she agreed. But he said it. Yes, she said. He said it. Luca looked at her, and his eyes were completely unguarded, the last wall entirely down, and she saw him, the whole of him, the boy and the man and the weight of all of it, and she stepped forward and put her arms around him there in the cold February garden, and after a moment he put his arms around her and held on with the specific, desperate care of someone who has not held anyone in a very long time and is aware of exactly what they have been missing. Enzo Conti died on the 14th of February at 3:17 in the morning, in his own bed, with Rosa in the chair beside him and no one else present. Sarah had been sitting outside the door again, the vigil she had maintained in varying intensities for the past 3 weeks since the second serious episode, and Rosa had opened the door at 3:20 and looked at her with the specific expression that required no words, and Sarah had understood. She had sat very still in the corridor for a long time. Then she had gone to the west wing. She knocked on Luca's door. She heard him immediately. He slept lightly, another thing she knew about him now, one of the 1,000 small facts that constituted a person. And the door opened, and he was already fully awake, reading her face in the half-second before she spoke. "He's gone," she said. He stood in the doorway of his room in the dark and said nothing for a moment. His face went through the private rearrangement of someone receiving news they have been expecting for months, and discovering that expectation provides less preparation than advertised. She watched grief do its work on a face that was not accustomed to being grieved, that had held things off for so long that the arrival of feeling had the quality of a structural event. "Luca," she said. He looked at her. "Come here," she said. He came into the corridor and she stepped forward, and he put his forehead against hers in the dark, both of them standing in the cold hallway, and she felt him breathe, once, twice, 3 times, the careful, deliberate breathing of someone choosing to stay present in an overwhelming moment. "He was my father," he said. "Yes," she said. "He made everything harder than it needed to be." "Yes." And his voice was very controlled. He tried at the end. Yes, she said. He did. They stood there for a while in the dark corridor of the house that was now his, and the estate was very quiet around them, the way estates go quiet at the moment of a patriarch's passing, as if the building itself is recalibrating its understanding of who it belongs to. What followed was what always follows in these houses, the machinery of death and power moving simultaneously, with the specific acceleration that comes when the death is expected and the interested parties have been positioned. By 7 a.m., Luca was on the phone. By 9, 3 cars had arrived through the side entrance. By noon, the attorney was there with the documents Enzo had prepared, and the transfer of the estate, both the physical and the operational, had begun its formal process. Sarah stayed out of it. She understood her role in this period, which was to be absent from the formal proceedings, while present enough to provide the household stability that Rosa required. She managed the house, the meals, the calls from people who needed to be acknowledged and then efficiently dispatched, the logistics of the death notices, and the arrangements for the private service that was being planned. She was good at it. She discovered this with some surprise, not the management itself, which she had always been capable of, but the specific competence she felt in this role. The understanding that she had spent 4 months learning this house and its rhythms and its needs with sufficient depth that she could run it without thinking. She was in the kitchen at 11 that night, everyone else finally gone, making tea in the quiet, when Luca came in. He looked exhausted, with the specific exhaustion of a man who has spent 14 hours in the operational rather than the emotional, who has run the machinery of a transition while postponing the internal work that the transition required. He sat down at the kitchen counter without ceremony, and she made him tea without asking, and put it in front of him. "The council has been notified," he said. "How did they respond?" "With condolences and interest," he said, in that order. He drank the tea. "The succession meeting will be in 3 weeks. De Luca will attend, Mancini, Ricci." "Will it be contested?" "Everything is contested," he said. "The question is, how effectively?" He looked at the tea. "My father's attorney confirmed the documents. The house is mine. The operational assets are structured as he outlined." He paused. He was more thorough than I expected. "He loved you," she said quietly. Luca was still. "In his way," she said, "whatever that way was, it was love." "I know," he said. And then, after a pause, "That's the part that's hardest, actually. Not the anger, not the years of all of it. The hardest part is that I know it was love, and it didn't change anything. And I kept hoping it would, and it didn't. And he died, and—" He stopped. "And it still doesn't change anything," she said softly. "And also it does, both at the same time." He looked at her. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Say the thing exactly." She shook her head. I've thought about it too. About love that's real but insufficient. About wanting more from someone than they're able to give." She paused. "I think it's possible to grieve both things at once, the person and the relationship they couldn't manage to have with you." He looked at her for a long time in the kitchen's quiet, with the city dark outside and the estate dark around them, just the two of them in the lamplight. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right." When this is over, when the succession is settled and the council has recognised the transition and the various interested parties have been managed, I want to be done with this. All of it. He paused. The empire, the machinery, I want to take what my father built and convert it. Legally, completely. It's possible. I've been planning it for 2 years, in parallel with the succession plan. Real estate, logistics, legitimate investment. It takes time, but it's possible. She looked at him. You want to leave. I want to build something that doesn't have to be defended with violence, he said. He stopped, and she could see him deciding something, testing the weight of what he was about to say. I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, without considering what you owe anyone or what you think the right answer is. All right? He looked at her with the full, unguarded directness she had come to love, the thing that was most his, most essentially him, the absolute quality of his attention when he decided to give it entirely. Will you stay? He said. Not in the arrangement my father made, in a different one that is yours as much as mine. He paused. I'm asking you to choose it, properly. She looked at him in the kitchen light and thought about the rain on the night she arrived and the letter she had written herself in her head on the drive up, all the reasons this situation was impossible, and how none of them had proved to be as immovable as she had feared. Yes, she said. He breathed out. Yes, she said again, because it bore repeating, because it was the best word she had, because after a year of saying it under duress and coercion and fear, it was extraordinary to say it freely. Yes. Yes. The council meeting was held at Nero on a Sunday in March, and Sira watched it from a remove she had carefully engineered. Not present in the room where it happened, which would have been inappropriate and counterproductive, but present in the building, in a private room on the floor below, with Rosa, waiting for the information that would come to Luca's phone and that Luca would pass to her as quickly as was practical. She understood, waiting in that quiet room with its view of Midtown at night, that this was the hinge point. Everything that had been building, the 6 years of preparation, the cultivation of the council relationships, the careful case against his father's legacy, the documented evidence of the transition's legitimacy, all of it converged on the next few hours. De Luca was in the room above her. So was Mancini, who had been, as it turned out, one of Luca's most carefully maintained relationships. A man who had been owed a significant favour for 15 years, who had been patient about its collection, and who had been promised, in very specific terms, what he would receive in return for his support at this meeting. Ritchie was a variable she did not know how to calculate. She had managed him at Nero in November and understood him to be pragmatic rather than loyal, which meant his support would follow the strongest apparent outcome. She sat and waited and thought about what comes after, because there was an after. Luca had said so, not in those words, but in the structure of the conversation. The legitimate conversion plan, the different arrangement, the word choose. There was an after, and she was in it, and the after had a quality she was not accustomed to applying to her own life. It was open. Wide, full of choices that were actually choices. Her phone, Rosa, practical as ever, informing her that coffee was available. She poured coffee and thought about Queen's and the restaurant and her father's tuneless singing and the specific shape of the life she had expected to have, the small, dignified life, the local life, the life made of known things, and how she would not have it now, and how this was not entirely loss. An hour and 20 minutes after the meeting began, Luca's message. Done. Council vote 4-1. De Luca abstained. She closed her eyes. Then, "Come up." She went up. The meeting room was emptying when she arrived, the various men dispersing with the efficiency of people who had completed a business transaction. De Luca was still there, speaking with two of his own men, and he saw her come in, and their eyes met across the room. His expression was unreadable, which was more information than anything readable would have been. Luca was at the head of the table, speaking quietly with Mancini, and he looked up when she came in, and something moved across his face. Not the public version, not the controlled surface, but the real one, brief and unmistakable, visible to anyone who knew how to look, which in this room was probably only her. Mancini excused himself. She came to where Luca was standing. 4-1, she said quietly. Ricci voted for, he said. Mancini, obviously. The Ferranos surprised me, but they came through. He paused. De Luca's abstention is a form of recognition. He's not going to contest. Not yet, she said. Not now, he said. Whether yet remains to be seen. His eyes were very dark and very alert, the specific alertness of a man who has just crossed a threshold he has been approaching for 6 years and is recalibrating what the world looks like from the other side. It's done. The succession. The succession. He looked at her. The beginning of the rest of it. The legitimate conversion. The everything. The everything. She agreed. De Luca approached them. He was composed, graceful, the practiced ease of a man who had learned not to let results show on his face. "Luca," he said. He extended his hand. Luca shook it. De Luca looked at Sarah. "Mrs. Conti," he said. His expression was something she would spend a long time subsequently analysing. Not quite a warning, not quite a concession, something between them. "Mr. De Luca," she said, with the pleasant, exact warmth she had spent 4 months perfecting. He left. In the room's sudden quiet, with only the two of them and the table and the remnants of the meeting, Luca looked at her. "He knows about us," Luca said. "I think he's always suspected. He's going to use it. Eventually." "Probably," she said, "when it serves him. It will require managing." "Most things do," she said. He looked at her with the expression she loved best, the one that existed only in private, the full version of him, and she understood in that moment with complete certainty that whatever came next, the De Luca complication, the conversion plan, the new arrangement, the enormous and ongoing work of building a different kind of life from the materials of the old one. Whatever came next, she was in it. Fully, freely, with the specific, fierce clarity of someone who has done the calculus and arrived at a conclusion and is not interested in revising it. "Take me home," she said. He looked at her. Then, the beginning of a smile, real, unguarded, the one she had seen only a handful of times, and that changed his face in a way she was not finished learning. "All right," he said. They left Nero together, through the main entrance, with no pretense about it, into the city's cold night, in a car that Luca drove himself. Spring came to the walled garden, with the typical insistence of spring in New York. Sudden, absolute, converting the bare canes to riot overnight. She stood at the kitchen window one morning in April and watched it happen. The specific moment of becoming, the garden going from waiting to arrived, and thought about transformation and what it costs and what it purchases. The house had changed. Not its architecture, not its weight, not the particular way it absorbed light and held it. These remained. But its interior atmosphere, the texture of daily life within its walls. The security was still present, reconfigured by Luca in the weeks following the succession into something more modern and more controlled. Rosa was still there. The household still ran with its impeccable efficiency, but something in the quality of the routines had altered. There was less watching and more doing, less performance and more occupation. Luca was different in the house now that the house was his. Not dramatically. The control was still there, the precision, the quality of total attention he brought to everything. But there was a groundedness that had been absent before, an ease of movement in the rooms that had not been possible when they were his father's rooms, occupied by his father's ghost. He moved through the house as if it belonged to him now, not in the abstract, but in the immediate, physical way that a man belongs to a space he has genuinely claimed. They had made no announcement. There was nothing to announce in the traditional sense. She was still, technically, the widow of Enzo Conti, and Luca was still, technically, her late husband's son. The legal reality of their situation required, Luca had explained, with the characteristic flatness he brought to logistical complexity, a period of approximately 18 months before the formal arrangement could be restructured without attracting the kind of attention that would be expensive. In the meantime, they were living, she had decided. That was the accurate word. They were simply living in the house and not performing anything in either direction. She had called her mother. This had been the hardest conversation, harder than the initial arrangement, because the initial arrangement had been conducted under duress, and this was not. She had called her mother from the walled garden on a Saturday morning, sitting on the stone bench where Luca had been sitting the first morning she had found him there, and she had told her mother the truth. Not all of it. There were parts of the truth that were not hers to give, and parts that would not serve anyone to deliver. But the operative truth, that Enzo had died, that the estate was now in different hands, that she intended to stay. Her mother had been quiet for a long time. Then, "Are you safe?" "Yes," she had said. "Are you?" Her mother had paused. "Are you happy, Sarah?" She had looked at the spring garden and thought about the question with the honesty it deserved. "Yes," she had said. "I think I am." Her mother had cried. Again. But these were different tears, she understood, with the understanding that 4 months in a house full of complicated people had given her for the specific emotional categories that crying contained. These were the tears of relief, and relief was something her mother had not had access to in a very long time. "Come visit," Sarah had said. "When things are settled, come and see me." "I'll come," her mother had said. "I'll come." She had relayed this to Luca that evening, and he had listened with the attentiveness he gave to everything she told him about her family, the specific, focused attentiveness of someone for whom the concept of uncomplicated family affection was theoretical, but who was trying to understand it anyway, the way he tried to understand things he had not had access to by paying very close attention to the evidence of them in others. "I want to meet her," he said. "Your mother." She looked at him. "You do?" "She raised you," he said simply. "And she—" he paused. "She made the decision she made. I want to understand the person who made it." She thought about this. "She was desperate," she said. "She was drowning. I've said this." "I know," he said. "That's not a criticism. I want to understand desperation from the inside. I've only ever known it, he paused, professionally. She understood what he meant, that he had spent his career managing other people's desperation, using it, accounting for it as a variable, not feeling it himself, or at least not acknowledging it as desperation when he did. You were desperate, she said quietly. You just called it something else. He looked at her. What did I call it?
Strategy, she said. Planning. The 6-year plan. All of it was a form of... You were trying to get out, the same as everyone. You just had the resources to make it look more controlled. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's accurate? Yes, he said, uncomfortably. She smiled at him, the genuine smile, the one she had not had much use for in the years before this house. He watched her smile, with the particular quality of attention he had for things he was still, apparently, surprised to find in his vicinity. Your mother sold her daughter to a crime lord, he said, and you have found a way to be generous about it. She's still my mother, Sarah said. Generosity isn't optional. For most people it is, he said. I'm not most people, she said. You said so yourself, in the beginning. I said you weren't simple, he said. I didn't know the full extent of it. She reached across the table and took his hand, the deliberate gesture that was no longer careful or calculated, but simply theirs, the unremarkable, ordinary intimacy of two people who have arrived at each other. Get used to it, she said. He turned his hand in hers, his thumb across her knuckles, in the gesture she recognized, the touch that was both grounding and something more. I intend to, he said. Outside, the spring garden moved in the evening wind, all that green suddenly, all that life coming back, the year beginning again with its ordinary miracle. The photographs arrived on a Tuesday in May. Luca's phone, 7 in the morning, a message from an unknown number with 6 attachments. He was at the kitchen counter with his coffee, and she was at the table with hers, and the change in his face was the first she knew of it. The controlled hardening, the calibration, the jaw. She had learnt to read this face the way she had learnt to read the house, by its silences as much as its signals. He showed her the phone. The photographs had been taken through the kitchen window. 3 of them showed the 2 of them at the kitchen counter in various recent mornings, close, but not compromisingly close. 2 showed them in the walled garden, one of which was from the night of the letter, the night she had held him, and which was considerably more compromising. 1 showed them in the front hallway, a moment she remembered. He had his hand on her face, a fraction of a second before she had stepped back, and the photograph had caught the hand and the face, with the specific cruelty of a moment frozen at its most revealing. She studied the photographs calmly, because panic was not useful. Vitale, she said. He placed a camera before he left, Luca said. His voice was extremely controlled. Remote access. We missed it in the sweep. How long has he had these? Long enough. Luca put the phone down. He was standing very still, with the particular stillness of enormous, managed anger. He waited until after the succession, which means he didn't want to use them to prevent it. He wants something else. He wants leverage for an ongoing relationship, Luca said. Not a one-time extraction. He wants to be able to come back to this. She thought about this. What does he want practically? Access to the port facilities, you said, the logistics network. Yes. Then he's going to offer a trade, she said. The photographs for operational cooperation. An alliance he can point to as voluntary rather than coerced. Luca looked at her.
When did you develop expertise in extortion? I've been listening to you for 4 months, she said. He almost smiled. The almost smile in the middle of a crisis was, she had learned, one of the ways he managed the pressure. The slight release valve of genuine response before the control reasserted. He'll call today, Luca said, or send someone. What do you want to do?
I want to end this, he said, and the flatness of it was different from other flatnesses she had heard from him. It was the flatness of a decision already fully made, not one being considered, not with cooperation and not with ongoing leverage. I want it finished. How? He picked up his phone. By making the photographs irrelevant, he said. She understood what he meant. If there was nothing to hide, there was nothing to leverage. That's a significant step, she said. I know. The council, the other families, they'll have opinions. They will, he said, and I'll manage their opinions. He looked at her directly. Unless you don't want. I want, she said. He looked at her for a moment with the full, clear quality of his attention. You understand what it means. The scrutiny, the public aspect, the history. I understand, she said, all of it. I have for a long time. I didn't want it to happen this way, he said. Not because of a blackmail attempt. I wanted Luca, she said. It doesn't matter how it happens. It matters what it is. He looked at her, and she saw him, again, as she always saw him in these moments. The whole of him, the full, complicated weight and beauty of a man who had built enormous defences and was, steadily, finding reasons to take them down. All right, he said. He made 2 calls. The first was to his attorney, who received instructions with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to Luca's decisiveness. The second was to Mancini, who listened and responded in a way that made Luca nod once and end the call. De Luca's representative called at 11. The conversation was brief. Luca's side of it was almost entirely silence, punctuated by 2 sentences that she heard clearly. Those photographs are going to be irrelevant within 48 hours, and you know it. And the only question is whether you want to be on the right side of the transition or the wrong one. After he ended the call, he stood in the kitchen looking at his phone for a moment. Well, she said. He'll think about it, Luca said. Which means he's already decided. He just needs to allow himself the performance of deliberation. And if he decides against, then we manage the consequences, he said, directly and completely. He looked up at her. We've managed consequences before. We have, she agreed. He crossed the kitchen and stood before her and held her face in both hands with the precise, careful tenderness that was uniquely his. This man who had been trained out of tenderness and had been finding his way back to it, increment by increment, for 4 months. He held her face and looked at her with the full, clear, unguarded look. Whatever comes, he said. Whatever comes, she agreed. He kissed her in the kitchen in the morning light, with no performance and no calculation and no audience except the empty house and the spring air coming through the open window and the garden going about its annual, insistent business of becoming. The summer was the most ordinary summer she had ever had, which was to say, it was extraordinary. The legal restructuring moved at the pace legal restructuring moved, which was geological, which suited her. She had learned patience in this house.
She had learned that the deliberate, methodical movement toward a thing was not the same as the slow movement away from it. The months passed with their events, the attorneys' meetings, the documentation, the careful management of the council's ongoing attention to the transition, De Luca's eventual and somewhat grudging alignment. And through all of it, she moved with the specific steadiness of someone who knows where she is going and is not in a hurry to arrive, because the journey is also, genuinely, the thing. She enrolled in a law course in September. This had been her own idea, arrived at through a summer of thinking about what she wanted the after to contain.
Not because Luca had suggested it. He had not, and when she told him, he had looked at her with the expression she had come to associate with his being surprised and pleased simultaneously, a combination that still read on his face as simple intensity. She wanted the law because she had spent 4 months watching the way power moved through legal structures, watching Luca use documentation and formal processes as precisely as he used any other tool, understanding that the law was the machinery that made the difference between what lasted and what did not. She was good at it. This was the second surprise of the year, after happiness, competence in a domain she had not previously had access to. She read cases with the same intensity she brought to the meditations, with the same marginalia filling interest, and her professor had said at the end of the first semester that she had the particular analytical mind that found the law genuinely pleasurable rather than merely navigable. She told Luca this at dinner. They ate together now, without occasion, the table set for 2 without ceremony, the way it had been with Enzo, but different in every way that mattered. And he had said, "Of course you do." "Why, of course?" "You've been reading Marcus Aurelius since October," he said. "You just found a different system for thinking about justice." She looked at him. "You've been paying attention." "I always pay attention," he said. "To me?" "Especially to you," he said, and the simplicity of it landed the way the simple things always did from him, with the weight of enormous prior investment, the specific gravity of something that had been carefully considered before being spoken. Rosa stayed. This had been a matter of some discussion in the spring, when the shape of the household was being renegotiated. Rosa had her own standing offer, a pension, an apartment, the formal and generous acknowledgement of 30 years of service. She had listened to all of it with her characteristic, competent expression, and had then said, "I'll stay on for now, if it's suitable," which had meant, Sarah understood, that she was not finished, that there was more she intended to witness. Sarah's mother came in July. This was the visit that Sarah had been both anticipating and, she admitted to herself, slightly dreading. The meeting of the world she had come from with the world she had arrived in, with the person she had become in the space between. Her mother was 60, and tired in the way of women who have worked very hard for a very long time and have not been encouraged to rest. And she stood in the entrance hall of the estate on a July afternoon and looked around with an expression that Sarah could not initially read. Then, "Your father would have said this was too much house for one family," she said. "He would have," Sarah agreed. He would also have tried to cook for everyone immediately. Her mother looked at her. "You look different." "I am different." "Good different," her mother said, and her voice had a quality Sarah hadn't heard in years, something lighter, something relieved of a weight it had been carrying. She had introduced Luca to her mother that evening, over the dinner she cooked herself, the Sunday gravy, the bread, the meal that was not the estate's formal register, but something more immediate and more honest. And she had watched the meeting with the attention she now brought to everything,
Luca with the controlled social surface that was his public mode, her mother with the assessing intelligence of a woman who had been reading men wrong and right for 60 years. Afterward, in the kitchen, her mother had washed dishes with the automatic efficiency of a woman who didn't know how to stand still, and Sarah had dried them, and her mother had said, "He watches you." "I know. He watches you the way your father watched me," she said, "when we were young, before—" She stopped. "Like you're the fixed point." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "Does he know that he does it?" "I think so. More and more." Her mother handed her a plate. "Good," she said simply, and changed the subject, and that was the full extent of her commentary on the situation, which was exactly sufficient. The conversion plan moved forward with the patience Luca had described. Real estate first, the simplest, the most legitimate, the fastest to demonstrate compliance with the new structure. Then the logistics network, which required the most intricate legal architecture, the careful disentanglement of the illegal from the functional, the redirection of the infrastructure toward purposes that could withstand scrutiny. He worked at this with the same systematic intensity he brought to everything, and she watched him do it and understood that this was the truest expression of what he was. Not the Mafia heir, not the cold strategist, not the dangerous man in the nightclub, though he was all of those things still, but a person who wanted, with a precision equal to all his other precisions, to build something that lasted. She helped where she could, which was more and more as her legal education deepened. She had a particular gift, she discovered, for the documentation work, the analysis of existing structures, the identification of what could be preserved and what needed to be transformed. Luca recognized this and used it, which was the highest form of his respect, the practical use of her capability. By autumn, they were working side by side, not as student and teacher, or as protected and protector, but as two people of equivalent standing, applying their different intelligences to the same problem. She thought about the Marcus Aurelius, the marginalia in two different hands. They were adding to each other's thinking, she understood. They had been doing it for a year. This was what she had not known to want, she thought one October evening, watching him at his desk, the map room that was no longer all maps, but had acquired the comfortable clutter of a space genuinely occupied. What she had not known to want was a partner, not a protector or a benefactor or even a lover, though he was all of these. A partner, someone whose mind she trusted and who trusted hers. Someone who argued with her when she was wrong and who received the same in return. Someone who was, in the most fundamental sense, her equal. She had not known to want it because she had not had evidence that it was possible. Now she had evidence. On the first anniversary of her arrival at the estate, it rained. She stood at the window of the east wing bedroom, her room still, which was technically accurate and had a kind of joke quality to it that she and Luca had not quite resolved, the domestic arrangement an ongoing negotiation as carefully conducted as any of the business negotiations she had watched him navigate. And she looked at the driveway and the gate and the iron-black trees in the rain, and she remembered. A year. The car. The suitcase. The name she had not yet answered to. Rosa with the umbrella. The sitting-room fire and the old man with dark eyes who had told her the transaction's terms without euphemism and had then, in the final months of his life, reconsidered everything. A year, and the weight of it was extraordinary. How much a year could contain, how many versions of herself she had moved through in 12 months, how profoundly a person could change without losing the thread of who they fundamentally were. She was still the girl from Queens, with the dead father and the desperate mother. She was still the person who had said yes under duress, who had arrived in rain with one suitcase, who had mapped a house she did not choose by moving through it carefully in the dark. All of this was still true.
And she was also the woman who had read law and would practice it, who had cooked the Sunday gravy in an estate kitchen and thought of her grandmother's recipes, who had stood in a garden in November and decided that thinking was finished. Luca came in. She heard him before she saw him. The specific quality of his presence, the way it altered the air, the thing she had noticed on her first night and understood now with a depth she had not had then. He crossed the room and stood beside her at the window, looking out at the rain and the driveway and whatever he was seeing when he looked at the same view she was looking at. "You were remembering," he said. "Yes." "What part?" "The beginning," she said. "The night I arrived. The rain." She paused. "I thought I knew what I was walking into." "Did you?" "Parts of it." She turned to look at him. "Not this." He looked at her with the expression that was his now in private, the expression she had learned over a year and still found herself startled by. The full, unguarded, specific quality of a man who has chosen to let himself be known. "I'd been thinking about the house," he said. "What about it?" "It was my father's," he said, "and before that my grandfather's. It's been contested space, weighted space." He paused. "I want to ask you whether you want to keep living here." She looked at him. "You mean leave?" "I mean choose," he said, "with full choice, no constraints. You could choose to leave, to live somewhere else, to any of it. I want it to be yours, the decision." "Where would we go?" Something crossed his face very carefully, the almost smile, and then the fuller version. "Naples, eventually. I have property there. My mother's family." He paused. "I've been back once, in the last decade. I want to go back again." "To the summers," she said softly. "To the summers." He looked at her. "And New York, and wherever you decide to practice. I don't particularly need a fixed location." He paused. What I need is considerably simpler than it used to be." She thought about this, about the house with its weight and its history and its walled garden going into its second spring, about the library with its annotated margins and the kitchen with its Sunday gravy, and Rosa with her impeccable efficiency and her 30-year investment in this specific family. "I want to stay," she said, "for now, until we decide to go somewhere else." She paused. "I want it to be mine the way you said. The decision." "It is," he said. "Then I stay," she said. "For now." She turned back to the window. "Ask me again in a year." He stood beside her, their shoulders close but not touching, both of them looking out at the rain on the driveway they had each arrived at separately on nights they had not chosen. And she thought about the letter Enzo had written, and the specific clarity of last days, the truth that accumulated weight eventually demanded to be spoken. "I love you," she said. She had not said it before. She had felt it for months and held it in the way she held things she was not ready to deploy, carefully, in the part of herself where the real things went. But standing at the window on the anniversary of her arrival, looking at the rain, it felt important to say it, in the ordinary light of an ordinary morning, without occasion
and without drama. The way the real things were, when they became simply true rather than revelatory. He was still for a moment. Then his hand found hers at the windowsill, covering it, the way he touched her, with the full, calibrated weight of a man for whom all gestures had always been considered, and for whom this one had the additional quality of something he had been building toward, and had now arrived at. "I know," he said. She looked at him. The almost smile was becoming the full version, the one that transformed him, the one she was not finished learning. "I've known for a long time," he said. "I wanted to wait until you said it in the morning, without any particular reason. I wanted to wait for the ordinary version." "You were waiting." "I'm patient," he said. "You know this about me." She laughed, genuinely, completely, the laugh that had come back to her incrementally over the year, the laugh she had not had much use for before this house and its complicated inhabitants. He watched her laugh with the expression he had for things that still, apparently, surprised him with their beauty. "Well?" she said. He looked at her. He said, with the flat, complete certainty that was his mode for the things he was most sure of, "I love you." 3 words. He said them with the same quality he brought to everything that mattered to him, without decoration, without performance, with the total investment of his full attention. She leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and they stood together at the window of the room where she had stood alone a year ago, listening to footsteps in the corridor, and the rain fell on the estate in the way it fell on all things, without distinction, without judgment, indifferent to human arrangements, and utterly indifferent to human love, which went on anyway, which had always gone on anyway, through all the rain and all the difficulty, in spite of every rational argument against it. Rosa appeared in the doorway behind them. "Breakfast is ready," she said, with the expression of someone who sees what she sees and has decided 30 years ago to see it. "Thank you, Rosa," Sarah said. Rosa left. They stayed at the window a moment longer, Sarah and Luca, in the rain light, in the house that had become theirs by such specific and improbable degrees. And then they went down to breakfast, and the day began, and the life, the ongoing, ordinary, extraordinary life, continued. Outside, the walled garden was in its second spring. The roses had come back, the way roses do, completely, without apology, filling the old stone space with colour and fragrance and the specific insistence of growing things that have decided they intend to keep going. The gate stood open.